In El Salvador, there are, well, it's a really small country, but they have 6 million people packed in there. And in Belize, it's about the same size, but there are 300,000 people that live there. And so El Salvador, all the houses are packed straight together, just concrete boxes. And they're very poor, but it's a very like developed kind of a poor. Like they've been there for a long time. And generally, the families, they all stay in the same house for a couple generations. Like you'll find great grandma and her children and their children, and they'll all be stuffed in this tiny little house. But in Belize, then there's tons of extra land, and it's generally also really swampy, and so they tend to make these houses on stilts, which are really awesome, kind of ramshackle looking houses. They all look like they're about to fall over, but generally they don't. You also tend to live in a lot of concrete houses in Belize too, but you have a little more space. The weather generally is the same. In both places, all you have is summer and the rainy season. Like you're not getting any winter. There's like 2 or 3 days each year where you get a little chilly and you think you might need a jacket. And that's about it. I still managed with a long sleeve shirt though for those couple of days. So that was cool. But you always get these big torrents of rain that come in really fast. But for transportation, then I talked about those trucks. Those are a lot of fun, except I think they're banned now. But they have these super old buses that are very exciting. They're very old, and so like sometimes you can kind of see the road going by below you while you're sitting there, which is a little disturbing. But generally you get there. And in El Salvador, really all you ever pay is like $0.25 to get anywhere, unless you're going a long ways, then you might pay like $1. So they give you a different amount of money in El Salvador and in Belize. In El Salvador, they just use the US dollar, but it'll get you a lot more. Like you, with the people going by and selling like pan dulce and stuff, then you can buy something for 10 cents. That's pretty tasty. But unless you want something from the States, and then it's a little pricey. It's pretty pricey. Then in Belize, then generally it does cost more. In Belize, they use like Belizean dollars, but a Belizean dollar is just half of a US dollar. So it's still in the same units and everything, and you can still buy stuff with a US dollar, and they'll just give you your change in Belizean dollars, which is interesting. But it makes it a lot easier for all the tourism that goes on there. And if you want to buy stuff with your US dollars, it is exactly a half, like it's based on the US dollar. So it looks really cool. I love the Belizean dollar. It's got a nice boat on it. It's very cool. In El Salvador, then, oh, I guess I did see their like national bird a couple times, torogos, which is very cool looking. It has a cool tail. And so you do see some cool wildlife, even though everything is pretty urbanized. I thought it was really interesting that one time a little girl, she asked me if there were woods where I lived in the US. I said, yeah, there are woods. And she said, we don't have any woods. And I was so confused. I had to stop and think about that for a little bit, because she pretty much lived in the woods, like in the jungle. But really there were like houses where she lived, and there were houses for just about as far as you could go. And then there were some cornfields and whatnot. They really weren't just straight jungles or woods in El Salvador, because there are just so many people that live there. But in Belize, then it's all like your classic jungle, like what you would expect out of a jungle, then that is Belize. On the top northern part, then it's all completely flat, and it's actually below sea level, and so it's all swampy, and it's always very wet, which is why they have to build all their houses on stilts. But down on the southern part, then it's your classic epic jungly mountains, and they're just so cool. I love those mountains. If you ever take the bus ride from Belmopan down to Tangriga, then you're in the bus for like 2 hours, I think, just rolling through these awesome jungly mountains. You can imagine like Nephi wandering through there. It's the same sort of place. In El Salvador, the main thing they have are big volcanoes, and so those are pretty cool. The one I loved a ton was Santa Ana. Santa Ana. It's got this huge like green lake in the bottom, and it is absolutely monstrous. It's so cool. And in Belize, they have a lot of ruins. There aren't so many ruins in El Salvador, just little tiny ones. But in Belize, there are a lot of Mayan ruins, and there's some pretty big ones. It's one of their main tourist attractions, so you want to go to those. And they have a lot of like water stuff you can do, but can't do it. I haven't looked into it. I think the coolest thing I can say about Mayan ruins is that they're really like everywhere in Belize. Like we had this investigator who was a classic like Belizean man. Like he had his dreads and he smoked marijuana and didn't want to drop it. But he lived on this little hill in the middle of nowhere. His name was Edward. But he lived on a Mayan ruin. Like he apparently his mom, for some reason or other, had pushed this hill over. I think they were going to build a road or something, and they found these Mayan graves, and they found all these pots full of just Mayan artifacts and whatnot that he sold to build his house. And there were still all these bits of pottery, whatnot, all around over there, and just awesome stuff. So that doesn't mean Mayan stuff is like laying out in the streets everywhere, but there is a lot there, and if you search for it, then people know about it too. In Belize, like you do find people that are really hard working there, but it is a very hot place, and they have a lot of hammocks, and it is a nice place to take a nap. Like generally you want to go and do that when you're out tracking. So it's a beautiful place though, and on P-Day then that is a recommendable thing to do, is to buy your hammock and go sit in that. Very nice. Generally we had nicer houses in Belize, and I think there's more of a range there, because El Salvador, it's very established. They have their concrete houses, though sometimes they do have houses that are just made of aluminum sort of pieces. But in Belize, then they have these little ramshackle houses that are just made of sticks pretty much. But generally we'd have the nicer houses that were a little more stable. And so I think it would have been, I think our first house was like $300, like $600 Belize. I could be wrong. But we had some pretty nice houses. The house in Belmopan was nice. We actually had like a washer, which was quite exciting. For transportation, like in Belize, then generally it'd be like $5 or $6 Belizean to get from like one town to another, whereas in El Salvador it'd be like a quarter generally. And so it was pricier in Belize to get from one place to another. And generally I think the food is a little bit pricier in Belize.